The Galactic Council Chamber was an architectural marvel, a vast, circular hall suspended in the vacuum of space, where representatives of the most advanced species in the universe gathered to deliberate the fate of civilizations. Today, however, there was no ceremony, no grand speeches, only grim faces and a growing sense of impending doom. At the center of the room, a holographic projection flickered to life, displaying the latest battlefield reports. Red zones spread across the map like a disease, devouring once-secure sectors of the galaxy. The Zarkathi swarm, an unrelenting force of biological nightmares, was winning. Archminister Zalvern of the Zalvarian Dominion, a species of sleek, silver-skinned intellectuals who prided themselves on strategic superiority, adjusted his flowing ceremonial robes and cleared his throat. The projections remain unfavorable. Our forces have suffered catastrophic losses in the last 3 cycles. If this continues, the core systems will be indefensible. His voice was smooth, measured, betraying none of the deep-seated panic clawing at his insides. Grand Strategist Ulten of the Vortani, a race of towering insectoids renowned for their tactical brilliance, clicked his mandibles in agitation. Our finest fleets have been reduced to drifting debris. Our warriors are not weak, yet the swarm outnumbers us 1,000 to 1. We need a solution, not another report telling us we are losing. A low murmur spread through the chamber. Every representative present knew the truth, but hesitated to voice it. The Zarkathi were not just winning, they were dominating. The Council had thrown everything at them. Energy weapons, nanite swarms, automated warships, but none of it had been enough. The enemy adapted too quickly, devouring fleets, planets, and entire civilizations with mindless efficiency. It was then that the human representative, a man named General Elias Walker, leaned forward in his seat, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Unlike the flowing robes and ornate garments of the other species, Walker wore something simple, a faded olive-green jacket with patches worn thin by time, a relic of wars fought on battlefields long before humanity had ever set foot among the stars. "So let me get this straight," he said, voice carrying just enough amusement to be irritating. "You've thrown your best technology, your finest warriors, and all your fancy battle strategies at these overgrown cockroaches, and you're still getting your asses kicked?" A ripple of offense passed through the chamber. Zalvern's silver eyes narrowed. "This is hardly the time for mockery, General. Humanity may be a recent addition to the Council, but I would remind you that decorum is. Decorum doesn't mean much when you're losing a war," Walker interrupted, leaning back with the ease of a man who had seen too many fights to be intimidated by politicians. "So far, I've heard a lot of talking and not a lot of fixing. You want a solution? I've got one." The chamber fell silent. Dozens of alien eyes locked onto the human with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Humanity was still something of a mystery to them. They had entered the galactic stage only a few decades prior, an odd species from a small, unremarkable world. Yet their rapid technological progress, stubborn resilience, and unpredictability had earned them a cautious respect. Walker exhaled slowly, as if considering whether or not they were even worth the explanation. Then, with a small nod, he made his decision. "You've been fighting this war like it's a chess game. Calculated, methodical, precise. But war isn't chess. War is a bar fight in a back alley when you're outnumbered, your nose is broken, and the guy in front of you has a knife." Strategist Ulten's mandibles twitched. "Are you suggesting we adopt a less structured approach?" "I'm suggesting you let the right people handle the fight," Walker replied. "You need soldiers who don't just follow orders, but who understand war. The kind that's been through hell, survived, and made hell regret the whole damn thing." A few of the representatives exchanged uneasy glances. The Zalvarians prided themselves on tactical mastery. The Vortani fought with disciplined formations. The Uldraki waged war through overwhelming technological superiority. But humans? Humans had a reputation for being unpredictable. Zalvern steepled his long fingers. "And where, pray tell, do you propose we find such warriors?" Walker's smirk widened. "Oh, we've already got them. We just need to bring them out of retirement. Confusion rippled through the assembly. A young Uldraki lieutenant, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed faintly blue, tilted his head. Retirement? Walker's grin only grew. The old boys. The ones who fought the dirty wars, the unwinnable fights. The ones who did things that history books conveniently forgot about. You see, in human warfare, technology changes, tactics evolve, but some things never go out of style. Grit, experience, creativity under pressure. You all rely too much on your fancy weapons and perfect strategies. Zalvern scoffed. You cannot be serious. You wish to send elderly soldiers to the battlefield? This is a war zone, General, not a historical reenactment. Walker leaned forward, his voice dropping just enough to command attention. You think age is a weakness? I'll tell you what's weak. Your soldiers relying on their AI targeting systems to do the thinking for them. You know what my guys had? A map, a compass, and a gut feeling. And they won. Ulten's antennae twitched in intrigue. And you believe these old warriors can succeed where our finest have failed? Walker's expression hardened. I don't believe, strategist. I know. The chamber fell into another long silence. The council had faced difficult decisions before, but this was unprecedented. Deploying retired soldiers, ancient by military standards, was more than unorthodox. It was outright reckless. Yet the war was being lost. Conventional tactics had failed. The swarm showed no signs of stopping. Zalvern exhaled sharply, his expression unreadable. Very well, General. You have your warriors. But know this. If your plan fails, humanity's standing in this council will be permanently damaged. Walker stood, rolling his shoulders like a man who had just won a bet. Oh, don't worry about us. He glanced toward the war map, eyes gleaming with something the council had not seen before. Excitement. The real question is, are the Zarkathi ready for what's coming? As the council adjourned, murmurs of uncertainty filled the chamber. The decision had been made. The old human soldiers were coming, and the war was about to change forever. The battlefield smelled of burning ozone and charred metal, a scent that clung to the air like death's perfume. The alien troops had been holding the line for hours, their once immaculate formations now reduced to scattered remnants hiding behind craters and the broken husks of war machines. Plasma bolts streaked across the landscape, lighting up the night like a twisted fireworks display. The Zarkathi swarm pressed forward, their massive, insectoid bodies moving with unsettling coordination, their serrated limbs slicing through defenses like paper. The young Zelvarian lieutenant, Silith, clutched his energy rifle with trembling hands. He had trained for this. He had studied warfare under the greatest tacticians of his species. He had simulated every possible scenario against the swarm. None of it had prepared him for this. The creatures did not think, did not hesitate, did not fear. They simply advanced. Their unrelenting march crushed the bravest warriors in the galaxy, and soon, Silith would be one of them. A thunderous explosion erupted to his left, sending a shower of dirt and body parts into the air. He ducked instinctively, heart hammering against his ribs. It was over. The line was breaking. He turned, ready to signal retreat, and then he saw them. They weren't sleek. They weren't armored in the polished, form-fitting combat suits of the Council's elite warriors. Their gear was mismatched, patched together from different eras of human conflict. Some wore old camouflage fatigues. Others had thick, rugged vests that looked more suited for hunting than war. And yet, the moment they entered the battlefield, the chaos changed. They moved with the slow, deliberate ease of men who had seen hell and decided it wasn't all that impressive. There was no panic, no wasted movement. They crouched low, weapons braced, eyes scanning the horizon like hunters tracking prey. One of them, a burly, gray-bearded soldier with a cigar clenched between his teeth, spat into the dirt and adjusted the strap of the ancient-looking rifle slung across his chest. Well, it looks like the roaches got a little too comfortable. His voice was a low growl, filled with the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from too many years spent fighting wars that never really ended. Another, leaner man with deep wrinkles and sharp eyes, knelt beside a crater, inspecting the battlefield with the practiced gaze of someone who had once mapped out jungles in his head while under sniper fire. He pulled out a battered metal flask, took a swig, and handed it to the soldier beside him, a woman with short-cropped white hair and arms that looked like they could bench press a tank. "You sure this is the right place?" she asked, flexing her fingers around the grip of an archaic-looking shotgun. The bearded man grinned, cigar still smoldering. "Darlin', if it ain't, then some other poor bastards are about to get a hell of a surprise." Silith had no idea who they were, only that the human general had insisted these ancient warriors be deployed. He had expected reinforcements. He had expected cutting-edge weapons and precision strikes. He had not expected this group of battered, aging humans who looked more suited for drinking contests than war zones. Then they opened fire. The sound was different. The Council's weapons were clean, precise, energy-based. But these barked. Loud, concussive thunderclaps echoed across the battlefield. There were no sleek plasma bolts, no perfectly calculated disintegration rays. Just lead, steel, and the unrelenting power of sheer kinetic force. The Zarkathi recoiled. They weren't used to this. Their exoskeletons had evolved to resist energy-based attacks, but these projectiles punched through them like wet paper. Blood sprayed as heads snapped back, chitin cracked, and bodies collapsed. And then came the explosions. One of the older men, a wiry soldier with a permanent scowl, lobbed a small metal cylinder into the air. The grenade arced, bounced once, and detonated with a force that sent bodies flying. The swarm hesitated. Silith's mind reeled. He had studied their battle patterns extensively. The Zarkathi never hesitated. Their tactics relied on overwhelming momentum, on the certainty that nothing could withstand their numbers. But now, they had encountered something different, something worse. The humans advanced. They didn't just hold the line, they pushed forward. The burly, bearded one led the charge, a massive revolver in one hand and an old, serrated combat knife in the other. He didn't fight like the disciplined formations of the Council's armies. He fought like a barroom brawler, ducking, weaving, slamming his knife in his soft spots between armor plates before finishing the job with a well-placed shot to the head. Another veteran, a grizzled man with an eye patch and an expression of perpetual disappointment, lit what appeared to be an actual Molotov cocktail and hurled it toward a cluster of Zarkathi. Flames erupted, chitin cracked, and the creatures shrieked in confusion and agony. A distant council commander was screaming into the comms. "What are they doing?" Walker's voice crackled back, full of something Silith couldn't quite identify. Amusement? Pride? Winning? The swarm did something then that had never been recorded in any previous battle. They retreated. It wasn't a strategic withdrawal. It was fear. Silith turned, still gripping his rifle, staring at the bloodied humans now standing in the wreckage of the battlefield. One of them, the sharp-eyed one with the flask, nudged the corpse of a fallen Zarkathi with his boot and let out a low whistle. "Well, that was fun," he said. The bearded leader grinned, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "Ain't had this much excitement since Grenada." The woman with the shotgun smirked. "You were in Grenada?" "Hell, I was in Panama." "You old?" the bearded man asked, raising an eyebrow. "Older than you, Grandpa." They laughed. Actually laughed. Standing in the middle of a battlefield surrounded by alien corpses, their faces streaked with blood and grime. Silith swallowed hard. He had always been told humans were different, that their biology was strange, that their psychology was erratic. But nothing had prepared him for this. These weren't just soldiers. They were something else, something terrifying. The battle was over, but the war had just changed. The humans had arrived, and the Zarkathi had learned fear. The Galactic Council's war chamber had never been so quiet. The room, usually filled with the droning voices of bureaucrats and strategists, was now a vacuum of stunned silence. The war map projected before them, once a sea of red marking Zarkathi-controlled territory, now flickered with growing patches of green. Human-controlled sectors. Archminister Zalvern stared at the data, his long fingers tightening around the edge of the table. It was impossible. It had to be. The best fleets, the most advanced warriors of the galaxy, had fallen like sand before the swarm, And yet these humans had turned the tide in mere weeks. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. General Walker. His voice was carefully measured. Your forces appear to have exceeded all projections. Walker leaned back in his chair, an old relic of Earth's military command seats, brought in as a personal preference rather than necessity. He was flipping an old silver coin between his fingers, an antiquated habit that seemed absurd in such an advanced setting. He smirked. You don't say? Zalvern's eye twitched. The sheer audacity of the man. But he couldn't deny reality. Every battle report read the same. Human units engaged. Human units pushed forward. Human units destroyed entire Zarkathi hives with frightening efficiency. Even Grand Strategist Ultin, whose species had prided itself on millennia of perfected combat techniques, was speechless. He clicked his mandibles once, twice. Your forces do not fight conventionally. Walker chuckled, setting the coin down with a sharp clink. No, we don't. Ultin hesitated, his antennae twitching. Our warriors rely on discipline, strategy, cohesion. But your soldiers, they fight like lunatics, Zalvern interrupted. I have seen the battle footage, General. These so-called veterans of yours do not adhere to any structured formations. They do not follow standard battle doctrine. They utilize ancient projectile weaponry, improvised explosives, and, in one baffling case, a sharpened shovel. Walker smiled. Ah, that'd be O'Reilly. Man loves his entrenching tool. Zalvern inhaled sharply through his nose. They are unpredictable. Walker shrugged. That's the idea. Silence stretched once more. Ultin broke it first, tilting his head. You understand the implications of this, General. Walker nodded. Oh, I do. And so do they. He gestured toward the war map. The Zarkathi aren't like you. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. They don't adapt. Until now. He leaned forward, his expression losing its usual smirk. Because now, for the first time in their history, they're scared. The room darkened slightly as the projection changed, displaying intercepted communications from the swarm. For the first time, their patterns were erratic. Their movements were hesitant. They don't know how to handle us, Walker continued. They understand fleets, armies, precision strikes. They've evolved to counter organized warfare. But they don't understand grizzled old bastards who don't give a damn about the odds. Ultin studied the chaotic battle logs, the increasing reports of swarm retreating from human-controlled zones. You have fundamentally altered the war. Damn right we have. Walker stood, tucking his coin back into his pocket. And now you've got a choice to make. Zalvern's silver eyes narrowed. A choice? Walker turned, pacing leisurely around the chamber. You all brought us in as a last resort, didn't you? You thought, oh, let's throw the primitive humans at the problem and see what happens. Well, now you have your answer. And it's making you nervous? No one denied it. Walker stopped, turning back to face them. So, what's it going to be? Are we still the desperate gamble? The wild card you barely tolerate? Or are we something more? Zalvern's jaw tightened. What are you proposing? Walker grinned, but this time there was steel beneath it. Simple. You treat us like equals. No more sideline politics. No more backhanded deals. No more treating humanity like the junior member of the council. We've proven ourselves, and we're not going back to being the underdogs. Ultin exchanged a glance with Zalvern. The council had always viewed humanity as different. Strange. A species that had risen too fast, learned too much, burned too bright. And now, they weren't just part of the war. They were winning it. The war had changed. And so had the balance of power. Zalvern exhaled slowly, glancing at the war map once more. The humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were claiming their place. The war was over. At least, that was what the Galactic Council was telling itself. Reports flooded in from across the front lines. Zarkathi forces in full retreat. Hive worlds abandoned. Entire sectors left eerily silent. No more endless waves of chitinous monstrosities pouring into occupied space. No more desperate last stands. The swarm had been broken, and the humans had done it. General Walker stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, a warship that had once been a relic, mothballed in the early days of humanity's entry into the galactic stage. Now it was the centerpiece of victory, orbiting above what had once been the Zarkathi core world. The skies were clearer than they had been in centuries, no longer clouded with the endless black tides of the swarm's broodships. The council had called for a meeting, a final debrief, a post-war discussion on reconstruction and stabilization. The usual bureaucratic nonsense. Walker had expected it. What he hadn't expected was them. The old soldiers. They had been the key. The council, in its infinite wisdom, had called upon humanity's best and brightest, expecting fresh recruits with the latest weapons, men and women trained under sterile combat simulations. Instead, they had gotten warriors from wars fought in jungle hellscapes, frozen tundras, and blasted deserts. Veterans who had survived battles that textbooks barely mentioned. Men and women who had spent decades at war, and when peace came, found they had no place in it. Until now, Walker stepped into the war room. Seated around the long, curved table were the highest-ranking members of the council, their expressions carefully neutral. Zalvern sat at the head, his hands steepled before him. Ulten stood behind him, his mandibles twitching in a way that suggested deep discomfort. Walker took his seat without ceremony, stretching out his legs as he set a well-worn flask on the table. "So," he drawled, "who wants to start?" Zalvern cleared his throat. "We wish to commend your forces, General. The unexpected effectiveness of your human veterans has been noted. The Zarkathi have ceased hostilities. Their hives have collapsed. The swarm is no longer a threat." Walker tapped his fingers against the flask. "Funny thing about that," he said, his tone light. "See, I was going over our latest reports. Something wasn't adding up." Zalvern's expression didn't change. "Clarify." Walker leaned forward. "The swarm isn't a mindless force." "Oh, sure, we like to think they are. That makes it easier. A hive species driven purely by instinct, incapable of higher reasoning. Just keep killing until they stop coming. Except," he tilted his head, "what if that's not true?" Ulten's antennae twitched again. "The Zarkathi have never shown higher intelligence beyond their queens. We have centuries of data to confirm this." Walker smirked. "Sure. And centuries ago, you thought humans were just another primitive species with no business in space. How'd that turn out for you?" The war room went silent. Walker reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data slate. "We intercepted something interesting on one of the hive worlds before we torched it. Zarkathi command signals. Only they weren't random." He slid the slate forward. Zalvern hesitated before picking it up. The moment he did, his silver eyes narrowed. "This is structured." Walker murmured. Ulten stepped closer, his mandibles clicking in growing unease. "This suggests planning, coordination beyond simple hive instinct." "That's right," Walker said, stretching lazily. "We've been fighting them like they were just bugs. Just mindless drones. Turns out they weren't fighting back properly because they never had to before. Until we showed up." Zalvern's grip on the data slate tightened. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm saying we didn't win this war," Walker interrupted. "We just proved to them that they could lose." Silence. A cold, dawning realization settled over the room. Ulten was the first to break it. If they were never truly fighting at full capacity, then what happens, Walker said, when they do? The council chambers had always been cold, but now it felt frigid. Zalvern set the slate down carefully, his face unreadable. "Then we must prepare for the possibility that this was not the end of the war, but the beginning of something worse." Walker exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, that's the smart move. But here's the kicker. We aren't the ones they're going to be coming for first." Ulten frowned. "Explain?" Walker's smirk didn't reach his eyes. "Humans were never the ones leading the charge before, remember? We were the backup plan, the council's last-ditch effort. You were the ones in charge of this war. You were the ones who thought the swarm was mindless. And now the swarm knows different." Zalvern's fingers twitched ever so slightly. "You believe they will target the council first?" Walker leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I think they're going to come for the ones who underestimated them. And when they do—" He reached for his flask, unscrewing the cap. "Well, let's just say, I really hope you've got more than a few dusty strategies from the last millennium to work with." The weight of his words settled heavily over the room. For the first time since the war had begun, it wasn't humanity that looked unprepared. It was the rest of the galaxy.